Hello. Okay, it looks like we are live. It is 8 o'clock. I'll just give everyone a minute or so to get settled. But hello and welcome to this live interview this evening on this very, very warm evening, the warmest day of the year for anyone who manages to hop in this evening. And I hope you've got a nice cold glass of something going on. I know I have. I just went and got a nice icy glass to get us through. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to this lovely live interview this evening in the Progressive Education Facebook group. So I'm your host for this evening. As you can tell, my name is Alex O'Neill, and I also host the Limitless podcast, which is aiming to inspire people in education to make changes in the world. So this evening, I am very honoured to be interviewing someone else who has already made a big impact on the education space, Dr. Ian Cunningham. Welcome, Ian, this evening.
Hi.
If you have any questions for Ian throughout the interview, please pop them in the chat or in the comments. We will get to any comments we can as we go through. But just to give you a bit of an intro, Ian is the founder of the Self-Managed Learning College, which is based near Brighton in the UK. And he is also a professor, an educator, and a learning consultant. He created the self-managed learning approach back in the 1970s, I believe, on which the college values are based, and has published 6 books and over 120 articles on education, leadership, organisational change that have inspired a generation to think about education completely differently. So it's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to be here with you, Ian, this evening. So Ian, tell me a little bit about how you came to create the self-managed learning approach and the college.
As you said, that the approach goes back a long way, and what originally I wanted to do was to work with organisations. I became a chief executive of a business school that was an independent business school, and my background is a chemist, and I've always taken an interest in being scientific. And so what I got interested in through my earlier career is, well, how do people learn and what happens, and why some things seem to work better than others. And I was someone who I suppose I agree with Oscar Wilde's statements, and I love to learn, I just can't bear to be taught. And I looked a lot at, well, what makes learning effective? How do things work? We did, for instance, a research project with senior leaders across lots of organisations, chief executives and people at board level, well-known professionals, and we asked them about the things that they did that made them effective, what made them good at their work, their particular qualities, skills, competencies, etc. And then we asked them, well, how come you can do these things? And there's basically a couple of probable answers. One is it's in the genes, or you learned it. There's not much else really. The physical change we go through has an impact on us, and most of the time they didn't mention stuff that would be genetic, and they talked about their learning from doing interesting projects, from travel, all sorts of things, and a very little mention of school, college, training courses, university, anything. I mean, it made very little impact, which at one level is sad and another level is quite nice, because what some radical educationists argue, like Cato Taylor in America, is that schooling is about making people more obedient and available to the employment market as nice, obedient people. It's slightly over the top as a definition, but so my interest was then, well, if these people learn from all these different things, why don't we just use those different things? And when I started out as a trainer, we'd do these week residential courses, and the people said, well, we learn most in the bar afterwards, than in the day. And I was thinking, well, Therefore, what we need is people opportunity to talk to each other and learn from each other. And so there was an approach called Action Learning, which was using that. And then I'd also worked in something called the School for Independent Study within what's now a university, where people could study anything they wanted. And put those two together and said, well, actually, what we need to do is to create opportunities for people to be in these small groups where they can support each other, but learn anything they want. And why not do that? And so therefore, that's what we've done in companies for the last 40 years or so. And then 20 years ago, parents in our locality were saying how awful school was, and none of the young people were out of school. And so we just started to run some groups, and then my wife had died, so I got a house, so we ran the program for my house. And basically, it's a very simple model, really, and it goes back to preschool days, which is everybody's different. And you find out about what people like and don't like and what they want out of life, and how can people learn to lead a good life, since that's what education ought to be about. And it varies around individuals. There's no standard formula, otherwise it'd be crazy. I mean, people do different kinds of jobs, lead different lives, and why not? That's the richness of Homo sapiens. So that was it, really. I mean, there's lots of other things I could say about that journey, but it was basically when we started working with young people, and we now have 9 to 16-year-olds, 40 in the morning and 20 in the afternoon, 2 separate programs. And they can learn anything they want in any way they want. And when they come to us from school, of course, they can't believe us. They don't trust us. Learn not to trust teachers. Promise things and then don't deliver. Well, we go, yes, you can learn anything you want in any way you want. And gradually they learn that, yes, that's for real.
I find that fascinating that you kind of started it from working with organisations, because you don't often, well, I haven't heard of that very, very often, but it feels like companies kind of got ahead a little bit more, that they were doing things differently already. And it's taking an awful long time for that to filter down to education. Is it? Would you say that's what you've seen?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. For a long time, I didn't want anything to do with the educational world. I mean, I'd been very disappointed. For instance, in university, coming from a working class background, I had this kind of image of this being this wonderful place where you could learn all sorts of things, and suddenly finding myself trapped into a narrow curriculum that was boring and didn't allow me to explore thinking and ideas. For instance, I can remember a physical chemistry lecturer. We had a lot of maths around electronic structures and things. I'm going, but what exactly is an electron? And he goes, that's philosophy, meaning shut up. And I thought, okay, this education lark is a con. I'm interested in ideas. If it's philosophy, why can't I explore philosophy? But no, it's about, you've got to pass exams, and that's what it's about. So, yeah, I went into the business world because that was much more open. I could do stuff there that you couldn't do in education. I mean, because I go to a board of directors and ask them about, what they needed to do to make the business better. And I'd say, well, where's the blockage? And they'd often say, well, people, we want people who are better. So I say, okay, so how do people learn? And of course, I'd ask them about how they learned, and they gave me those answers, that they'd learn in all sorts of different ways. So I said, it can be done for free, because a lot of the learning is in the organization. Like I can remember a marketing director saying to me, well, I really need to understand how the finances work around here. He was kind of admitting that he'd become a director, but didn't really understand. So I need a finance for non-financial managers course, which there's lots. And I said, well, you've got to talk to your finance people, your accountants. And he went away, he came back and said, they're really nice people, and I've learned all I need to learn. So I'm interested in saving money for businesses and businesses working better, which is a slightly unfashionable notion in the educational world, which tends to see business as kind of this nasty, corrupt world. My experience is that education is the nasty, corrupt world a lot of the time, and that yes, there are businesses that shouldn't be doing what they're doing, but there's a lot of good people out there that I really enjoyed working with, because basically they just want to do a good job, and the notion that you could learn this stuff without going on courses that was a revelation to them.
It's amazing, really, like, because my experience of being at work is I literally learn all the time. Like even though, I've been doing the same job for a number of years, I still learn new things all the time from just doing. So yeah, amazing. What would you say was your biggest challenge when you were setting up the college?
I think parental assumptions are one of the challenges, because there's assumption of there's a default, isn't there, that you send your kids to school. That because that's the easy choice for parents. And pointing out to them that in law there are two choices. One is school, and the other one is something else called otherwise in law. And that law doesn't say school is preferable. Law doesn't say school is the default, actually. It says you've got two choices which are equal in law. And that is a bit of a shock to parents. And say, well, and then you can send your kids to school, and that's your choice. But some people home educate. But quite a lot of parents didn't want to home educate, quite rightly, and wanted support. And we were able to say, well, we could offer that. So getting parents to think differently about the education of children, and that, why not trust your child, that they know themselves. Your child is the expert on themselves. And obviously they need help during this period. So it's not just about casting them adrift, but it is about starting with the person and who that person is, and just asking parents, well, you've got 2 or 3 children, are they all the same? Well, no, they're very different, and yet they've come from the same genes, but they're different, and they're different personalities, and they have different needs. So why don't we respond to that? The other bit was the educational world, which I think finds it very difficult, because we're a challenge, especially when, as often happens, we take into the college young people who've been rejected in the system, and they've become successful. And so there are some people in it. I mean, we're a bit like Marmite in terms of our local authority, that some love us because they go, wow, that's brilliant, we need more of it. And others bits go, wait a minute, this is a threat, because being successful, doing something that doesn't fit. I piece about how the thing about self-managed learning is it's like quantum theory. A professor of physics I once heard lecture saying the two problems with quantum theory: one is it accounts for all the available evidence, and second, it makes no sense. And I think that's the same. We account for all the available evidence about learning. We work to 100% of what is the best evidence about learning, and for the average school teacher and educational administrator, we don't make any sense.
Yeah, and how do we get past that?
Well, we just decided to go do it, and we know that there are people who won't like it, and we just go, well, we'll just have to live with it, because there are lots of people who do, and there are lots of parents who've been desperate, where the children have suffered enormously within the system, and they just, we had our college ball last week, which was great. I'm glad the students chose to have a ball. I was to prom, which we don't want American imports, so we had a ball, and then we did have a ball, but it was great. The parents coming, and going, oh, it's been a lifesaver for our child, etc. And that's the joy of doing what we're doing. I mean, we have some ex-teachers working with us, and they just say, I love coming in each day. And I was talking with the husband of English learning advisors, we call them, and he said, well, she now comes home each day smiling and full of it. And when she was in school, she was miserable and depressed, So that's the joy of doing this work, is that and I meet ex-students occasionally around Brighton, and the other day I was walking out, somebody shouted out, hi, what are you doing? Oh, I'm at the college here, and I wouldn't be here without you, and it's great,
Yeah. Cool. What a contrast to what I see so many teachers saying, sort of on social media and that sort of thing, about how much they are drained by their work, and oh, what a joy to be able to go to work every day and love it. So I've got a question come in from one of our listeners. So they say, Ian, do you think it's worth trying to change the system from the inside, or better to focus on creating a new educational paradigm on the outside?
Well, we've gone for the outside route, and I had worked on the inside quite a bit. I mean, worked in a what was a polytechnic and now a university, and we did have some successes, but eventually the institution drowns those because it doesn't fit. So I wrote something recently quoting what Mr. Fuller. You know, if you want to change something, create something new, and show people a model of something different. So what I think we've got two objects in what we're doing. One is to actually really serve the children and families in our locality. And the second is to show a model, not the model, but a model of something different, so that when the school system actually does collapse, which I think it will in the next 10, 20 years, there is a model of something else. And I think that the moment, for instance, all the messages that go into government and out from government is, oh, well, the education system's doing great, it's just we need to do a little bit of tidying up. But the people at the sharp end know it's falling apart. I was reminded of the autobiography of Colin Powell in America. He was a famous general and on stage thought to be a presidential candidate, and he fought in the Vietnam War. And he said, well, we sent back all these reports to Washington saying we were winning, but everybody on the front knew we were losing, which they did. America in the Vietnam War were badly beaten by kind of ill-equipped bunch of Vietnamese. And I think that's happening in education as well. All the messages are, oh, well, testing results are going better. But actually mental health problems are getting worse. We're now getting exposure about the sexual assaults on children in school from the peer group, not necessarily from teachers, although that isn't a problem with a small minority. That bullying is out of control in schools. And one of our local schools has just failed Ofsted inspection. And it's nothing to do with the teachers, it's to do with an institutional framework that can't work. And so it's in quite a deprived area. And what the Ofsted inspection showed is that parents and children say the school is unsafe, there's levels of violence, and there's levels of sexual abuse going on, and it's an unsafe school, and Ofsted has agreed. But then you go, well, it isn't any use just tidying that up. I mean, they will tidy it up and get through their next Ofsted, I'm sure. But they're not really addressing the fundamentals, which is that if you people in these large institutions where they can't be a learning community. I mean, the other way in which we talk about ourselves is as a learning community. And we have a community meeting every morning when we come in, or at the start of the afternoon. And at the end of the session, we have a community meeting, and we sit around, and it's chaired in rotation by, it could be a 9-year-old or a 16-year-old chairing the meeting. We don't, as adults. And we talk about things and work things out. And that's what you need to do to make communities work out in the wider field. We want our students to be people who can engage with the local communities and feel part of the world, that they care about the world, and the issues about the environment. I mean, so schools get all these lectures about this, and then like today, if I went down on the beach, the amount of litter that would be down there would be horrendous. So people have preached about not leaving litter and about the despoiling of the environment, and yet they carry on doing it because it's all to do with institutional frameworks where people feel disempowered and they don't feel connected to other human beings. So they feel disconnected. Oh, if I drop this piece of litter, it doesn't really matter because it's only just one piece of litter. Well, yes, but that one piece of plastic that ends up in the guts of a fish somewhere, but people... If
everyone does that, yeah.
School teaches young people to be unecological, so they learn in separate subjects. So what if we're to think ecologically, we have to think about the totality. So it's this being systemic. And if you learn, I can never understand why history and geography as two separate subjects, because if you think of history, everything happens in a place, so you need to understand places. And if you think about geography, everything in geography is about the past. There's nothing in geography that hasn't come from the past. So why were they two separate subjects? and it makes no sense. And why are they separated from English literature? If you want to understand, say, War and Peace as my favourite novel, you need to understand the history. You need to understand the geography. You need to understand the climate. You need to understand warfare. You need to understand all sorts of things. You need to understand anthropology. You know, the cultural differences between the French and the Russian, and yet, things are taught separately in boxes, and therefore we approach the world as a series of boxes. There's a brilliant piece by social anthropologist Gillian Tett showed that the 2008 disaster, financial disaster, which is still with us, was to do with people in teams doing things separately from other people and not connecting in any way, and therefore making decisions, because that's what the education world tells you to do. You become, especially in the academic world, you just know more and more about less and less. That's how you make it.
Oh my goodness, that's a very succinct way of saying it, I think. So, I mean, one of the things about the self-managed learning approach is it's not just applicable to the college. No. If for any educators here who are working in mainstream schools, do you have any suggestions or recommendations on how they can bring this approach into the classroom?
Well, I think it's difficult to bring it into the classroom. We work in schools. We've done a number of programs in schools, and if anybody wanted a copy of an article written by a deputy principal where we did a program in the school. But this is the other frustration with schools, that we went in there. The program worked really well. Initially they had gifted and talented kids, and they didn't know what to do with them. So we said, well, it's not about pumping more knowledge into them. How about we put them into groups of 6, and they each work out what they want to do with their lives, and then we help them to do it. And the groups will create their own rules, and will obey the school rules, of course. But and it worked brilliantly. And then they gave us, the group of year 8 boys who had been in and out of exclusion. The notion being they probably all going to be excluded by the end of the year and could we rescue it. Well, it's difficult because you just sit down with them and find out who they are and what they want to do in life, and then help them to do it. And it wasn't complicated, and I could go into a lot of detail about what we did in the schools. So you can do things in schools, but I think you can't do it in a classroom. I think that unless you break the classroom down into bits, because you can't connect. I mean, the average secondary school teacher locally, I think it's something like meets 280 children a week. Well, you can't know 280 children. It's impossible. Yeah. All the anthropological research, people like Robin Dunbar, who's come up with 150 as the magic number, and other people say maybe it could be a bit bigger, a bit smaller. But nobody thinks that a school of 1,000 people, you can know everybody. And we know that from the research that if you want to get rid of bullying, for instance, you've got to have every child knows every adult knows every child, and the most important, every child knows every single other child and really knows them. Then in schools, that you get the gang culture, you get different groups. We end up with, interestingly, with quite a few mixed race kids who've been some racist bullying. It's the most neglected, largest minority in the country, actually. And it's interesting that we've had quite a few mixed race kids who, get bullied because they're different. And in the community, then that difference is just valued. We have students who are all different, and they enjoy the differences. But that's because they get to know each other. In a community of 40, they can actually know everybody. And the young ones can know the older ones, and vice versa. And whereas in a school, those age differences are rigidified, I think, in the school, which is a shame, because in families or in communities, or how we existed as humans in hunter-gatherer bands for 99% of our human history, we've existed in these small bands where people learn very sophisticated skills and abilities, not by having a school, but by engaging as a peer group together and learning from the adults, but learning from the adults in a more apprenticeship model, for instance, or whatever, but not sitting in a classroom.
Yeah. And interestingly, it seems like basically one of the only places where we sort of segregate by age as well, rather than by interest or ability or, anything like that. Certainly once you leave school, that segregation just isn't really there anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's very artificial, and that's that's why I'm saying I'm not blaming teachers or any particular individual. I'm blaming an institutional arrangement which is fundamentally faulty. Original schools were actually not that big, and now we have, I think, one of our biggest local schools, about over 3,000. You can't get 3,000 people, and you can't create a community of 3,000 people in that sense. If I think about the community here in our street, well, it's a few houses. You know, we know each other, and you know, do things together, and everybody eating food in the middle of the road, and we know each other, but you know, we don't know people from the next road, and but it doesn't mean to say we're not friendly with them and things. But the people you know and trust and say, you know, they can come into your house and they can, you know, build that connection with people, and that trust doesn't exist in large scale schools.
I read a book. I think it was about unschooling. So very much communities where it was very similar to what you're saying, in terms of kids just did kind of what they wanted to do and learnt what they wanted to learn. And one of the things that the author said in there was that bullying didn't exist because there was no need for it. Like, there was nothing to push against, and that actually a lot of that behavior in school is about pushing against all these barriers, which, you know, kids might not even realize they're pushing against because they're just used to, well, that's just school. But actually it's all these constraints and, you know, being forced to do things they don't want to do and engage with people they don't want to engage with every single day. And so it comes out in this aggressive behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. For instance, I did a study of why you had those issues in America and those murders in schools, and it's because a lot of that, you know, that you often got a couple of boys, you know, got together and kind of suddenly developed this hatred of the school, and so they went and killed people. And over here, because we don't have guns, so what happens is people set alight to their schools. Arson is rampant in schools. I looked at the insurance information, and there's hundreds every year of arson attacks, and pretty well all ex-pupils, whenever they catch them, former or current pupils in the school have engaged in this. And why, if it feels like it's your place, but of course it isn't. You know, their teachers say my school, so they go, well, it's his school, so fine. I don't like it, I'm going to burn it down, because and of course not, you know, well covered nationally, because it did, you know, local events like that. But if you do I did the research on museums and libraries and parks, for example, you don't get arson attacks in libraries. And what's the difference? Well, a library, you're free to go in and free to wander, free to read whatever you want. Nobody's going to, you know, impose. They might tell you to shut up when you make a noise, but otherwise, that's how I learned when I was a kid and growing up. And we didn't have any books at home, but I found the library and I thought, this is amazing. I learned in the library because I had the freedom to read anything I want. But I was working in a school where they were actually saying, so that there's a primary school, and the kids wanting to read this book. No, you're not at that level yet. You can't read.
That happened to my daughter. It happened to my daughter. She wasn't allowed to read a book because it was too high level. Yeah.
Outrageous. Okay, institution that's causing that, you know, and it dehumanizes teachers by the fact that they end up saying that. It's dehumanizing for the teacher.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you're a professor, and you've done a lot of research and stuff on education and educational approaches and that sort of thing. What do you think is the greatest barrier to schools adopting a more flexible approach to learning?
Well, I think that the teacher training obviously does to train people in classroom management and things like that. So again, there's this institutional arrangement. I think one of the things is that there's a confusion sometimes about saying what we do is unstructured, and it actually isn't. The school structures are there for controlling people. So the timings, for instance, through the day, you get interested in something and then you're suddenly told to move because you're doing this art project, and now you've got to go and do maths, and it doesn't matter whether you're engrossed in it, because that's how the system works. So that structure controls people, but I think that structures aren't necessarily for that purpose. So I'll get my glass as a so Well, it's because it's a rigid, empty, transparent structure. So you can put wine in it, which I had originally, or water, or milk, or juice, or whatever. It has to be robust because it goes in a dishwasher, and you don't want to break your glass wood. It's too thick. It's transparent and stores in it, but it wouldn't be any use if it was made of paper, and then you put the liquid in, and it goes everywhere. So the value of this is a constrained structure with nothing in it. And I often say, well, the most important thing in early human development was the person who invented the hole for a wheel, because a wheel's useless without a hole. Once you put a hole in it, you can have an axe on, you can have an ox cart, etc. So usefulness comes from nothingness. It's a very Taoist idea. The room I'm in is useful because it's not full to the ceiling with desks and tables. It's a bounded space, and it's useful. So what we have is quite strong structures that provide freedom. So like a morning, it is shared. The great rules, which are then posted on the wall and laminated, and everybody can see that. And they're revised every term. And the person sharing it is, as I mentioned, one of the students. People can raise anything they want. They raise their hand, and they can literally raise anything they want in the meeting. Similarly, we have what we call learning groups. So we do group the students by age purely for the fact that, for instance, the 16-year-olds have got to deal with GCSEs and college entrance, whereas the 9-year-olds don't. So we have small groups of 6, which are age-based, but which again create rules, and then each individual in that group decides for themselves what they want to do. So the whole of the first week is we find out about the people and who they are, and the young people who come to us, and then what they're interested in, and then they launch off. And the groups meet every week. So this is quite a rigid structure. That the group will meet, but each individual can talk about anything they want in the group. So the group I've had this year, I have one autistic student who doesn't speak. That's okay. He communicates. And he's a lovely member of the community, but he's never spoken to the students. He actually speaks to autistic members of staff we got to, and so he'll speak to them. But one of them said that he smells autism on the not literally. So so the most valuable boy is he'll talk about what he's wanting to learn. He does a lot of coding, but he'll talk about chickens because he's raising chickens at home, and he'll talk about we got these new chickens and they're being bullied by the older chickens, and so and he could talk about the chickens because it's something that is part of his life, and that he's learning a lot from raising chickens as a 9-year-old. But also he talks about coding he's doing, the games he's creating, and what the new software he's been working with, as well as all the other stuff. So they can raise whatever they want in those groups. But it's an empty structure. They right and what's the problem, I think, with teachers is that they're used to being proactive. They come with a lesson plan and things that they teach people.
With an agenda.
When I go to the group, I have no idea about what they might raise. I do have some idea because I know them as individual personalities and the kind of things that matter. So I know that Alex might be talking about chickens, but maybe he doesn't that week, and that's okay. But if he talks about chickens, it's because that's something that matters to him. And so your job is then reactive in that situation. They'll come up with, I want to learn X. So the student who said, I think I'd like to learn the law. This was a 15-year-old, and it was kind of weird because she's a very creative artist. And okay, and then she decided to learn out of a book. And I go, well, would you like to meet a lawyer? Yeah, okay, so we bring in a lawyer. How about you see action? Oh, that sounds a good idea. So we went down to, which is the best free show in town. So you can see the law in action. My job then is reactive. She would come up with the things she wants to learn. I might challenge her because I'm going, what's that? And she just thought it would be, it's useful as a citizen, and it was a challenge for her. She was someone who was came to us as pretty much kicked out of school because she was dyslexic and ADHD, and so this was a challenge for her. How do I learn law when I'm quite dyslexic and ADHD? And she wanted a challenge, so okay, that's fair enough.
But one she chose, absolutely.
She chose it, And of course, it was incredibly useful to her because she learned how to write better, which meant, by the way, that she then, at age 15, produced a graphic novel, which was published and was sold well. And the publishers couldn't believe that a 15-year-old girl could write a graphic novel.
Amazing.
But it had to be a graphic novel. She needed the visuals to be able to do the words, and there's not a lot of words in a graphic novel, so that's her expertise. Anyway, so we do have these structures, but they're structures to liberate people, to give them freedom. Like we say, well, and I know this working with adults, where we run these groups, and individuals say this is the only place that I can just talk freely. Even family, they feel constrained by the kids, whatever, and by circumstances, and they would say, this is a place I can come to. And when we work in an organisation, that usually every month we have a whole day of these learning. People will come and talk about their life and what choices they need to make, and the company's paying for this, but they know that if people are happy and have an opportunity to explore things that are meaningful to them within that structure, that it makes a difference. And individuals will talk about career choices, and they can't talk about that to their boss because they're thinking of leaving their boss, do something else, But then they need to talk about what the implications of that choice might be. Working with a group with the IT, who's actually got an IT background, and he'd gone sideways, and he's been offered the IT job, and it would mean moving, and he's going, but my wife's a teacher, and she's happy where we are, and the kids, and but I'd like to do this job, and where else could he talk about this? Now it's the company benefits because they have people who, when they do make a career choice, either to take that job or not, they thought it through, and they're likely to be more engaged and happier than if somebody has just had to jump at something because they've got no place to explore it. He couldn't talk to his boss. He talked to his wife, obviously, but it was, he needed somewhere separate from the family to be able to talk about, well, what am I doing with my life?
And sometimes in that case, they might be making a really good decision within the organisation as well, I assume, like moving roles between,
Well, I remember we did a programme in Sainsbury's for what was called personnel in those days, and it was, everybody was on the programme. So we had about, I think, something like 50 groups of 6 people, each of which was facilitated by somebody. What was interesting was that a number of people decided to leave the company because they didn't like the change that was coming. And the 2 directors who had sponsored the program said, actually, what we got was some really good decisions, that people chose to leave because they weren't going to hack it in this new world, and they could leave feeling good about it because they'd made a rational decision about, this is not going to work for me. I used to be the old-fashioned personnel police person, where it's going to be a new model. And others, for instance, interestingly, quite a number of women in their 30s going, I want to have a family sometime, but I've not seen the world. So they actually negotiated a sabbatical year for themselves, a number of them. And they never thought about that they could do that. And they said, well, can I have a unpaid sabbatical to travel the world? And I don't want to come back and have a family. And the company goes, well, yeah, why not? And then they never thought that they could ask. Same thing happens with the children we work with. They never think they could ask this. They come up with things, well, it'd be nice to have a 3D printer. So they said, well, I will get a 3D printer. You mean we can get a 3D printer? Yeah, of course we have. We have a joint committee for resources, which is each of the learning groups, and there's 7 of the groups, so there's 7 students and a couple of staff members, and that committee decides on things like learning resource expenditure, about expenditure for the building, in the kitchen, trips, etc. And that committee has the power to make decisions within the budget heads. And to move money across. So students, for instance, decided they'd like to have free food and drink in the kitchen, and they take money out of the cleaning budget, and they would clean every day. So that's what they do. So at the end of the afternoon, the students are grouped, and they go and clean. They mop the floor in the toilets. They hoover. Kitchen is usually the worst one to get because they make quite a mess in there, cooking and things. But it's their choice, because they could go, well, let's just have a mess and we'll get cleaners in. Okay, but you're not going to have free food and drink in the kitchen. And no one's saying no, that's a choice they could make. Then they stick with it.
Yeah. And they're invested in that choice that they've made. Yeah.
And that's a structure. That committee is a structure that frees them, because they're free to make decisions as a committee.
Yeah. Sure. As someone who is naturally not very structured in the way I work, I have a lot to say about the freedom in structure for sure. But I'm not going to go into that too much myself. But I've got a question about the college and how it runs, a little bit more of the nitty gritty. So someone's asked, how do you support the learning wishes of individual children when they're in a community on a very practical level? So, for instance, if one person wanted to learn woodwork, one person wanted to learn about football, one person wanted to learn about computer programming, how do you facilitate that for all of those individual desires?
Yeah, no problem. So I in the group I was working with is a boy who might want to be a footballer, but he's also wants to work on learning English and maths and things. And again, there's a choice. Like if you take, say, maths, some of them like to be in a group and they'll meet, especially when they get to GCSE level, and others don't want to be in a group, they want to work on their own. So there's not only the choice about what they want to learn, but how they want to learn it. But yes, so we do have students who, I mean, for instance, I had a visitor the other day and he said, well, that's really weird, because there was a group of 3 of them in a room with the guy who does maths. We call him learning advisor. So he's the maths learning advisor, and we have 3 of the younger students. There are 3 other students around the wall with headphones on the computers doing stuff, programming and coding and stuff, and making computer games and all sorts of things. They're in the same room. And then one of the students, said to the learning advisor, I think I've got enough now, I'll go. So he was kind of saying, because originally he said, well, this looks like a classroom in the small. I said, well, actually, but if somebody's decided they've got enough, they can leave. You can't do that in a school, in a classroom. But this is not a classroom, it's a workshop in which the students are raising what they want to learn, and the learning advisor will be responding. But it is no problem. And we have an art room, and students can do all sorts of different things. So Liz, who works in the art room, she'll spend her time wandering around, somebody sewing something. For instance, for the ball, a number of them made dresses, but they're making different dresses, and each of them do it. And one of them was making weird stuffed animals, and drawing, and she'll be wandering around helping them with whatever they want to do, and they can all do different things, and they can literally work on anything they want. And if they want some piece of kit, then it can go to the learning resources, the joint resources committee. So it's not a problem. And so you've got the way the building is set up, it's one end is a quieter end and the other end is less quiet. So we've got a music room, and again, students can wander in. If our learning advisor for music is working one-to-one with somebody, and people know that person, but then it might be booked from between 10 and 11, but somebody else said, okay, at 11 o'clock I'll go in and beat the drums for a bit, for half an hour, because that's what I fancy doing. Or a boy who doesn't speak at all, I mean, he writes hugely and does something crazy, and then he'll have a break playing table football. And that's okay as well, and he's very good at it. It took me and another learning advisor to beat him, because he's very skilled. But
so it's that structure again, isn't it? It's kind of having those rules and that structure to work around. Yeah.
So at the morning community meeting, people will raise that, So say the learning advisor does English, and he will say, they've got a project on a book, So when should we meet for that project? And then people will say, and then it goes up on a board, which is a whiteboard, so it's written in that day. So there is a timetable, but it's created at 9:15 in the morning in the community meeting. And then somebody else might say, I don't want to come to the session, can I have a one-to-one with you for half? Okay, that goes up. And others will say, I'll come and find you, and they'll know when somebody's free. But it's okay. We have 4 adults on, and then we have volunteers coming in. And then if somebody wants something that we can't do, we try and get somebody in. Like I mentioned with law, we don't as a lawyers, but it wasn't difficult to find a lawyer who would come in and have a chat with a student. Or we go on a trip, so somebody was interested in architecture. So we go to the architect's studio, and the architect was But it was wonderful that they wanted to really understand what architecture was about, as opposed to ending up on a course and then not realising what architecture is really about. And that's something I missed. I chose a chemistry degree, which was totally the wrong choice for me. But it was like I kind of like science, but I really didn't like when I started a PhD. I gave it up. Spending the day washing out test tubes and things. I found the lab boring.
Not as fun, yeah.
So it's really important that they try things out, and often that they don't necessarily work out. But so there's no such thing as failure and mistakes. There's just feedback. If you've done something that doesn't work, what have you learned from it? So they are able. So when the community meeting's finished, the students will just scatter around the building. Some will go to a quiet area. Some will go to the art room. Some will go to the music room. Etc. And they'll scatter, and then go out to the playing fields across the road. And again, that's optional. So usually about 11 o'clock, people want a break. So we'll go, all right, okay, we'll go half an hour. We'll go and play on this outdoor gym equipment, and there's a playing fields. You can play football. And again, they just create it themselves. I mean, they want to play football. So play football.
They must. It sounds like I remember hearing once, someone saying the argument for not being in school is that they won't learn enough different things. But it sounds like you have so many different interests going on in the college, like that. Yeah, they get all sorts of inspiration on what they could learn, and they could jump in on a sort of, oh, you're going for a trip to the local, architect studio. I'll jump in on that and come and find out what it's about.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what happens. So we'll do, and others will go, no, I don't want to do that, and if it's a student we think is quite artistic, we might say, well, a lot of it is about drawing and this. But I said, no, I need to do creative art. I want to do it. Or they're interested in being artistic on these tablets where they make amazing digital art and things. We've got these kind of, so I don't understand how the hell they work. But it's not difficult, because once you get rid of the classroom and the wasted energy of scheduling everything and marshalling people around, and that it's not a problem to create, but you've got to be small, obviously. I mean, we couldn't do it in a 1,000. Well, a couple of our students did actually. There was a conference and they did an event, and a couple of our students actually, it was a more techie event. So they said we could try and create a piece of software where students could go in and say what they're interested in, and on it would be all that's available in the school, and you could match people up with available results.
Okay.
So they were actually developing a kind of prototype of something like that. Now, whether it could actually work, especially with very large institutions, but it was interesting that we've had 2 Ofsted inspections from the bit that closes down illegal schools, but we're not an illegal school. But we had an inspection 5 years ago, and I explained to the 2 inspectors, look, we can't be a school because we don't have a curriculum, there's no classrooms, there's no imposed timetables. We do have a structure, and they do all have objectives that they're working to. They plan each week and they review the next week about what's gone well and what hasn't gone well, and then they create a new plan for the next week. Anyway, they went round and interviewed all the inspectors, split up, and they finished at the end. And I was with the lead inspector at the end, and he said, you said you don't have a curriculum. He said, you have a broader curriculum than any school because your children can learn anything they want. And I said, that's exactly it. And they took a minute to decide that we weren't an illegal school, because we're not a school for a start, and we're certainly perfectly legal.
Interesting. Oh my goodness. So I've got a couple of other things. Oh, someone, I'm afraid I can't see who it was, but someone says that they obviously run some sort of similar group where a lot of the children ask why the meeting is necessary. So what would you say to that? What do you feel is necessary about that meeting?
Well, it's we don't get that. We have a couple of students who've got real issues about larger groups, so they stand by the door, for instance. But we don't get because we just say, well, it's not there to discuss about the place or anything. It's about each person saying, all right, I want this or I don't want that. And if you don't come to the meeting, then you don't get what you want, perhaps.
To choose.
Because if you want to, if there's a group meeting in the morning and it's at the time that you can't make because you're in another group, that's a problem for you. But if you're in the meeting, you can influence that. And no, we don't actually get that. But I think one of the things is that it's a very quick meeting, unless there's a problem. And the same at the end of the morning. It's a very quick. Sometimes it's like literally a minute. You know, we all come in the room, and anybody to say no, right, goodbye. You know, it literally can be like that. Because so we don't just have meetings for the sake of it, but we are keen that we respond to individual students through different media. So I mean, part of it is like the learning group where somebody doesn't speak. I can actually go and tell somebody that they would like this because they're not going to talk about it because of their high level of autism. But so I will sometimes do things on behalf of students and make sure that their needs are being met because they don't want to say anything. But no, we don't. But they are pretty quick. You know, a morning meeting might be 10 or 15 minutes, and the end of the morning maybe 5 minutes. You know, it might be, you know, somebody didn't do their job in the kitchen, you know, what happened there, or you know, the sink was left in a bit of a mess. You know, what happened, something like that. So it's kind of practical and quick.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense.
Young people don't want to talk about learning philosophy and stuff. You know, I mean, they just want to get on with stuff. You know, and if they want to have a discussion about things, I mean. Somebody mentioned the schools bill, and so I said, I'll talk to anybody about it. And there was one student who was interested, so we sat and chatted about the schools bill, and because he was thinking, what's for us, and why are the government doing this? And how does the government, well, you know, what's that? Why did it go to the House of Lords, not the House of Commons, and all that? So you know, that was fine, but it's only one person, but it was fine. He got what he wanted. He would like to have a chat about the bill.
Yeah. So those meetings are kind of really functional for the day, really, just makes the college run. Yeah,
absolutely functional and quick.
Yeah, which for kids is exactly what you need.
Sharing it, you know, they're not going to sit and pontificate like so. You know, you've got a 9-year-old chat, and the 9-year-olds actually love sharing, by the way. And they right, you know, you shut up, you know, what you want to say.
My daughter would definitely do that. She'd love it. So we've had a couple of people, one person actually before the session, and I think one person here asking about funding. So can you explain a little bit about how the college is funded?
So we're part of a charity, and part of the way we set it up was the business that I chaired put money in to get things going, and then we raised funds, and then we do ask parents to pay something, and we have. What we've evolved towards is a hardship fund, so that if I mean we're in quite a poor area of the coast. Actually, we're just outside the boundaries of Brighton and Hove, in a port area that is quite a deprived area, and the local children, you know, parents don't have money, but we can raise money, and there's, you know, we have a fundraiser, and where we got a fundraiser was I got a contact with somebody I knew from way back, property developer, who I knew had this notion of I don't want to give handouts, I want to give a helping hand. And I thought, okay, so we can't afford a fundraiser. He's funded the fundraiser for the first year, and the second year 2/3, and the third year 1/3. But the fundraiser, basically, in fundraising, the fundraiser should raise 4 times as much as it costs to pay them. So for every pound it costs to have him doing the job, and he's not employed, he's in a consultancy job, and he's very experienced, and he loves raising money for us. So at the ball, we raised money for that, and afford a ticket, they were able to come anyway. So we do ask for money from parents, and the parents who can afford it. I mean, we don't like to do that. It's not exactly an ideal world, but it's like, how else do we do this and have the freedom from the state? But what's been interesting is looking at internationally that lots of countries, the public education system has fallen down, and small fee-paying schools operate in the slums of many countries. And initially, international bodies and the governmental bodies just couldn't believe that they existed. But there's a who's gone into these countries and helped to set them up, and they're fee-paying, and they exist in the slums, often small numbers of children often, and they in many cases work better than the public sector, where they don't really teach at all, and large classes where there's no individual attention, etc. So it's interesting internationally that there are people like myself who think that the state needs to separate more. That actually the law in this country says the parents are responsible, not the state, not the local authority, and that should be recognised. And in America, they now are providing more freedom. I mean, it's controversial, but the voucher scheme, there's just one being set up in Arizona where every parent gets a voucher for, I think, $6,000, and they can spend it wherever they want. In other words, they can send it to the school, state school, or the public school, as they would call that, or home educated, or in small learning centres like ours. Micro schools have become quite popular in the States, and here as well. And I'm kind of agnostic about where this is all going to head, but I do think that it's like what else can we do? You know, I'm not going to sit there and listen to the parents who are pleading with us that their kids can't. You know, a mother going, well, you know, it won't go to school, and I'm being threatened with prison. And by the way, there are at least 10, usually mothers, end up in prison every year because their children don't go to school.
Wow.
And I think it was last year about 25 people were imprisoned, only for a few weeks. You've got a 15-year-old girl who won't go to school and mother's in prison. You know, is that going to help? But
That's insane.
What the state is doing, and the schools bill that's in front of the Lords at the moment will make it worse. More power to local authorities to issue these school attendance orders.
Yeah.
And you know, there's been a huge uproar about, you know, after pandemic issues, lockdown, that a lot of parents sort of decided that it was actually quite good. Son or daughter wasn't in school. The establishment, education establishment.
Yeah.
So,
experience the freedom.
So if you're a head teacher, you know, every extra student is an extra, I think it's about £5,000 a head, you know. So if you lose kids, you lose a lot of money. I mean, basically the money follows the children in the sense of family. Children are on. With the academy system, that the government wishes every school to be an academy in the future. And therefore everything will be run by the Secretary of State. He'll become the super head teacher for every school in the country.
Well, what a terrifying thought that is.
Yeah, given that we had 3 different education in 3 days. You know.
Oh, yeah. I don't really want to see that future.
So we don't like charging money, but you know, it's like we say to parents, it's your choice, you know, and if you don't want to come to us and you want to home educate, and we'll try and be helpful. So we are a charity. We try to help parents who well, in some cases they don't feel they want to come to a place like ours. They want to home educate, and we'll go, well, but we'll also try and support you in doing that. You know, I mean, it's I do believe that if the law says the parents are responsible, then it's our job to help parents.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like such great work that you're doing at the college, Ian, and I just hope that it continues. We've actually almost come to the end of the session, which I can't believe how quickly that went. And I know we didn't get to everyone's questions, so I'm sorry that I couldn't get to everyone's questions. But just as like a final couple of sentences, Ian, what do you see as the future, or what would you love to see as the future of education?
Just more of these small community settings. Why not? And you don't. We're in an office building. It could be in a shop. We've looked at retail outlets. So you can have these, and there are now growing numbers of these learning communities around the country. Some of them on farms, or in a field with a yurt, and or whatever, and the forest schools. And we know that again, children benefit from being out in nature and about being in smaller environments where they know people and they can develop the social capabilities that they're going to need for the world of work, and that this is possible. It's possible now to do that. We're doing it now, if you like, but what it would be better is if there was a whole way in which that could happen. And internationally, it's developing. The International Democratic Education Conference, where people talk more about democratic schools, is growing globally. There are thousands of which are quite different from the traditional model, and it is possible. And that we're interested in supporting people. So if people didn't get the question answered, they can email me. I mean, I think if you go through Joe, you can get in touch with me. This is going to be put out as a recording, isn't it? Anyway, and
absolutely.
And you can read my book, which is Self-Learning and the New Educational Paradigm, which is not that expensive, and it's in the back from Routledge, and there's a lot of stuff in there.
Thank you, Ian. Oh, this has been such a pleasure, and it's been lovely to have you here. And yeah, I just loved hearing about your work and the Self-Managed Learning College. It sounds amazing, and I will definitely be having to book in to come and visit you guys, because it sounds like such a great place.
Love visitors.
Yeah.
So thank you, Alex. Thank you.
And thank you, Joe, for setting this up. So if you like the sound of the Self-Managed Learning College and you'd like to support them further, you can actually donate to their hardship fund, which supports, as Ian said, supports students in their local area. You can do that by going to localgiving.org/charity/SML College. And I think there should be a link in the description to this anyway. Also, we talked a little bit about like small community learning communities and that sort of thing. Joe and I are actually running a workshop on the 4th of August, which you can sign up to. It should be advertised in the Facebook group, where you'll get to meet lots of people who run their own settings, both sort of full Ofsted registered settings and smaller, more flexible settings. So if it's something that's there's a little thing in there where you'd love to do it, and I've seen a few people who are kind of like, oh, I'd love to set something up. Come and join us at the workshop and come and find out from people who actually do it, what it's like and what the challenges are and where you can go with it. And Ian, I'm sure you'd be happy to answer questions as well if anyone has any. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming this evening on this very warm evening. I hope you can throw open some windows and get some ice packs and cool down this evening. And the recording will be available afterwards as well. So it's been absolutely wonderful to be here, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your week. Thank you. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Alex.
Goodbye.